The next decan on my Gemini journey is Gemini 2, the second 10 degrees of the sign. So from 10 to 20 degrees of Gemini is the part of the zodiac that we're looking at today. I'm going to explore the tarot cards and numerology as well as some ancient wisdom associated with this decan. First, I'll say a little bit about Gemini energy in general and what it involves. And I'll give you a couple of examples at the end of two people that have their rising degrees in this part of the zodiac, Mindy Kaling and Drew Barrymore. So there's a lot to unpack. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, like and subscribe. It helps people find the content. So we always start getting a feel for the vibe of the sign, Gemini. Gemini is the sign of the twins. It's got an inherent duality about it. It's a mutable sign, meaning that it contains both fixed energy and cardinal energy, kind of a combination, and mutable signs always have a flexibility about it. This doubles down on the notion of the duality of this Gemini sign that has to do with balancing ideas of light and darkness. And we really see this in the second decan of Gemini because it's ruled by Venus and Venus and Mars, two signs that have a really different two planets that have a very different relationship and how to relate to others, how to relate to information that's coming toward us. So let's talk about that idea of how to relate to information that's coming toward us. The two planets that we're talking about here are Mars, the god of war, that has to do with cutting off and ending and protecting us when we're feeling penetrated by that which disturbs us, right? Mars, if you look at him in the sky, is the first planet on the other side of the Earth from the sun. So there's this quality of separating there. He's separate. It goes Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, right? So Mars is on the outside protecting us. And then Venus, the goddess of love, is the closest planet to the Earth. And then it's Mercury, and then it's the sun, right? And so Venus has an internal quality, a bringing together quality. You know, Venus was the goddess of love and beauty and balance and justice. Venus has a relational quality of wanting to bring people together, wanting to receive the other, right? So we have one planet that wants to receive, has a receptive way of connecting with people, and the other, Mars, that has a cutting off way of connecting with people and situations for the sake of preservation, right? So we put those two energies together with Mercury, the mind, and what do we get, right? Well, if we look at the tarot card that's associated with this decan, we see that it's the Nine of Swords. Swords are always the tarot cards that relate to air signs because swords have to do with the mind and air, right? So here we see a woman who's awoken in the middle of the night. You could imagine by a dark dream, right? We see the darkness behind her, and man, there is pain in that card. She is suffering. We see the mental anguish hanging over her head. The swords hang above her. They do not penetrate her, right? So it's intrusive thoughts, ideas, thoughts, Gemini, right? Because Gemini is about information, among other things. And then, so we see the Mars related quality to that, the anguish, right, of the perseverating thoughts. Perseveration just means these thoughts that go on, right? There's a certain amount of difficult energy there. But then we also see that the woman is covered by a blanket of roses. And so there's the Venusian quality there. It's a beautiful blanket, and there's a certain amount of comfort available. So we get this complexity of the decan where people with energy in this part of the zodiac are maybe grappling with unconscious ideas or dreams or thoughts or that want to penetrate, that want to come through to them, but there's a resistance that's creating, some mental distress. So mental distress can have to do with part of the energy of this sign. At the same time, they have this natural capacity or the potential to work through the energy by perhaps making art or finding other ways to comfort themselves, sort of access the reality of the shared nature of mental distress, and then bring some beauty out from perhaps the suffering that they experience as a result of having energy in this part of the sign. So there's this complexity of, you'll find people that are comedians or have this great sense of humor, wittiness, right, because of the Mercury, and at the same time struggle with mental anguish. You can see this also from the tarot card from the Thoth deck. Sorry, I'm trying to get out of the sunlight or the light from my light, which is called Cruelty, right? You see this card, maybe if I bring it back. And you see there's blood dripping from the swords there. Now, it's interesting, Thoth, Crowley, when he created this deck, he's only thinking about the Mars energy of this deck, and he's not really bringing in the Venusian energy, but we're going to see the Venusian energy in other symbology or other ancient images that are associated with this deck. And so it really is present, this potential to make art and find sustenance, find connectedness within some of the mental anguish, or how you deal with perhaps all the thoughts that are swirling and trying to come in and be received by you in that Venusian way. So let me just bring up some of the other images or information that I was talking about with regard to this decan. First, we get Agrippa, who wrote the 3 books on occult philosophy, has a description of this decan. He was like a 15th or 16th century occultist, magician, astrologer, philosopher, and he described this decan as an image of a man in whose hand is a pipe and another being bowed down, meaning bending down, digging in the earth. And they signify infamous and dishonest agility as that of jesters and jugglers. It also signifies labors and painful searchings. So you see the comedic quality, the potential for a comedic quality, and also the searching perhaps for a little meaning, or how to deal with some of the mental anguish that comes up with this particular decan. And one way is through humor. Right? We're really going to see that with Mindy Kaling, as well as Drew Barrymore, the way in which they use self-deprecating humor as a way to deal with some of their own pain, and then also invite other people in, Venus, to the reality of life, that sometimes it has these difficult struggles, but that if we make light of it, there can be a healing quality, like the rose-colored blanket in the tarot card. So we see that Agrippa kind of mirrors some of that energy, or his description, both the idea of digging and grappling, painful searchings, as well as jesters and jugglers, people who may make light of it, right? Now, with the 9 of Swords, we can also bring in a little bit of numerology and Kabbalah ideas, because the number 9 is associated with this decan. The number 9, I can't remember where I read it, but I did read this morning that it can kind of have like, whereas the number 3, if we look at the 3 of Swords card, it's 3 swords penetrating a heart. There's a completion to it. It's got a calm quality. The number 9 is 3 times 3. And so there's this idea of a dynamic, cyclical repetition of the pain. And again, we see that with the energy of those 9 swords hanging over somebody who's woken up from a nightmare in the middle of the night and needs comfort. So that, hence the idea of some perseveration involved. Mercury likes to think and can get a little spun out. And that's Mars Mercury, right? That painful quality. And so that's part of the numerology essence of it. And then through the Hermetic Kabbalah, there's this idea that nines serve as a bridge between all of the Sephirot, the 8 numbers that come before, and Malkuth, which is the number 10. And Malkuth represents the physical realm. So we're bringing down all the energy from above into and trying to make it into something in this life. That's what the number 10 is. It's physical reality. So we're at the very last of the numbers that has to do with bringing spirit into life. And so we even see in this card the idea of being awoken by a dream. So you can imagine when, I know this from my own personal experience, that when a new idea, something perhaps I've not want to know, is trying to penetrate from the unconscious, something that maybe that my conscious mind, my ego doesn't want to deal with. Oftentimes what happens is my mind goes spin, 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 right? And it's not until I allow in that Venusian quality of the 9 has the potential for allowing in and receiving with love the disturbing thought that's trying to penetrate. And so that's the bridge that the 9 can bring, is it allows the thought that wants to penetrate to come in, and then we can use it to create something in the material world. We can use it to finish off, to complete, to let go of thoughts that do not serve us any longer, and allow in a new conscious attitude. And we'll see that with the 10 when we get to the Gemini 3 next week, that there's a certain completeness about letting go of the perseveration. So that was a little bit of a long explanation, but I think it's important to understand that even if the energy of the 9 can be difficult, there's something very productive about it, about playing with the dark energy and the light energy together, about accepting and working and wondering about the cruelty of the mind and the way the mind can be cruel, but also how in that moment there may be comfort, that blanket of roses, that Venusian receiving, that allows us to reconcile and to live with some of the absurdity of life, some of the difficulties that can come up for us. We can sort of face our fears and regrets with tenderness, which is very important. And that's really what you see in the lives of Mindy Kaling and Drew Barrymore. So Mindy Kaling, if you've ever watched any of her shows, The Sex Lives of College Girls is one show I remember seeing where she really deals with this idea of using mental energy for ill or for good. That is kind of the task of people with the 9 of Swords, or people with the planets in this second decan of Gemini. And one of the themes that she addresses is in her own life. When she was at Dartmouth, she was on the college comedic journal, and she went through periods where she was honing her comedic craft and found that she was being pretty cruel in her comedy. Remember this number, this cruelty, right? Card. And some of the theme of Sex Lives of College Girls is, one of the protagonists in there is somebody who's on a comedic journal and is just a bitch, excuse my language, in her comedy, and has to sort of take in the reality, the relational reality, that she's hurt people with that. And how Mindy Kaling, over the course of her life, her comedy matured and moved from the place of cruelty to the place of self-deprecating humor, where she's able, through her work, to acknowledge her own internal struggles, to acknowledge the pain, of those, of that 9 of Swords energy. And in so doing, she comforts herself, because she's inviting other people into the reality of shared suffering, right? The reality of what life is. It can be soothing if we offer ourselves up, and if we're kind toward our ourselves as opposed to attacking ourselves. So one could look at the Nine of Swords and say, you could have a couple of ways of dealing with the energy. Those swords are hanging over you. Do you attack yourself and create pain and suffering? Do you attack other people like Mindy Kaling perhaps did with her comedy early on? When she was at Dartmouth? Or do you find a middle ground, Venus, where you bring people into the reality of suffering, where you contain your suffering and you use sort of it as a way to connect with other people? And that's what Venus can do. And it can soothe both yourself and soothe the world, because we all know what it's like to have those, difficult mental thoughts, right? And then you could also look at Drew Barrymore, who has also gone through a lot of struggles and pain with addiction in her life, with being a young child star, not necessarily something that she wanted, but was foisted upon her. But then also through her show, The Drew Barrymore Show, as well as some of her sort of rom-coms, has this quality of acknowledging her own suffering and what she's been through in a way that is self-deprecating and kind of, but loving toward herself. She's a single mom, I believe, and I think on her comedy show, she's often, or not her comedy show, but on her talk show, she's relating to other people in the audience, but by talking very clearly about her own struggles, but bringing humor in it, right? And making it into art, which is what Venus loves. Venus loves to make things beautiful and relatable. So you really see the potential for Gemini too, to, in its mature fashion, to actually bring real warmth and love into the world and to heal some of those wounds. So there's a real complexity about this decan of Gemini. And after spending, a few hours today really working with the energy of the card and reading about it, I come to this love of the card and love of this energy, which is good, because when we see the card, it can feel overwhelming. But as Rachel Pollack says in 78 Degrees of Wisdom, that there's a real potential through love, and that love is a feature of this card that can bring out its highest potential, the love for self, the love for others, that allows us through the Venusian relating to connect in the midst of deep pain, and just to acknowledge that sometimes we have that mental anguish. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next in about 10 days for Gemini 3. Thanks a lot.